Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I'm Sherilyn, and today, as I'm getting ready for NAB and attending the Creator Lab, I think I've got the secret to film distribution. Would you please welcome Marcus Beaufils? Hi,
Hey,
Marcus.
hey, Sweetie, how are you?
Mar- I'm so good. Thank you for joining me today. I know
Of
that
course.
you're just an expert and a legend when it comes to distribution from your time at Universal, exhibition with what you're working in the film now. You have so
Sure.
much expertise and wisdom and legacy in the entertainment industry. Would you please help the viewers get ready for NAB? Coming up, we've got Cannes, AFM moved into Las Vegas, South by just wrapped. What can the independent creator do now to successfully launch their film when it comes to distribution?
Well, it's an awfully big ask, but I'm going to
Yes.
start with some. I'm going to start with some of the simple things. Number one, I am sitting in a modern 21st century projection booth right now. Sorry, wrong way. We have the beautiful Barco 20Cs, which are basically legacy projectors, uh, and yet somehow in this beautiful eightplex, 3 or 4 times a day, we receive media from terrestrial or from satellite delivery or by terrestrial internet delivery. The days of physical delivery are pretty much gone. Um, and I thought that part of what I would start with today is inspiring today's filmmakers to better understand the past. Because I think when you understand the past and respect the past and honor the past, the future tees itself up much more genuinely, much more vigorously. And I think as creatives, it's important to realize that every creative is now riding on the backs of every accomplishment that every other craftsman, every other technician, every other scientist and chemist and engineer in this business who works so hard to give us the incredible tools in the toolbox that we have today that we didn't even have 30 years ago. They didn't exist yet. And to think um, that we now have the ability to democratize storytelling in a way that 100 years ago wasn't even possible because you had to pay the patent trust with in the very early days you had to pay the patent trust to Thomas Edison, and then along came Carl Laemmle and William Fox, who took them to court, and all the very slow evolutions that took 100 years to get us to the point where you can take your iPhone and go out and make a really compelling film, create something that will inspire and illuminate and entertain and educate people who are sitting in that communal spot.
Yeah.
So, um, as a distributor, a little bit about myself. I do come from a sizable legacy as a studio person. Um, I had the great honor of working in the 91608 at Universal Pictures for 2 decades. Worked on the theatrical sales of nearly 380 feature films in my life. Titles like Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, and little known titles like Heart and Souls and The Public Eye with Joe Pesci. Little known fact, Public Eye was the first publicly released DTS sound film into theaters that we as the salespeople actually had to sell the DTS units along with the movie. So, and then, cool as ice, People Under the Stairs. And in 1998, I was privileged to be a part of the studio operations team in the distribution department at 20th Century Fox Film Corporation at the studio. Worked on the release of another 126 films at Fox and Fox Searchlight. I was more on the what happens when post production gets the signed internegative from the filmmaker, and then making sure all those 35 millimeter prints that we used to have back in the day were actually getting through the lab and getting through the proper channels to get to the final destination, a place like this. So, um, as a little kid, I knew I wanted to work in this business. My parents were two very dysfunctional human beings who I think loved each other more than they knew that they did because they created me. So I'm very happy. But when I was 12, my parents separated, and I had to deal with growing up very quickly, and all those lofty, dreamy goals of working in show business had to kind of fit into what was offered, what was available. So I started running a movie theater when I was 17 in rural New York State. I moved to Boston, New York City, and in 1986 I moved to LA. I was a managing director of the Cinerama Dome in 1988. The theater and I were both 25 at the same time, and it was quite a privilege to be a part of that magnificent Hollywood legacy, from Hollywood Boulevard to the studios. And it's the only lifestyle I know, because it's all I've ever done. And I can still remember when we were kind of getting the this is the future presentation about what we'd just come off of a Y2K. And Y2K factored into this a lot, because there was a lot of interest in how do we create this next era of filmmaking and film distribution and exhibition, and all this stuff where it all kind of comes together in a way that's more efficient and more effective and more profitable. So along with the Y2K thing, there was preparation to make sure that all of the ways the studios talk to our film, fulfillment and the labs and all this stuff kind of factored in. And then it came the conversation about digital cinema. And one of the big barriers to digital cinema was the cost. A projector, like, always the wrong way, like that, when it was brand new, was about $100,000. And to have an 8-plex, you're looking at almost $1 million just to modernize, to be able to play movies. So the studios created an initiative, and a part of that initiative was a way to help theaters that needed help to convert, pay for that conversion. And that was an instrument called the virtual print fee. And the virtual print fee, there was 5 different integrators, and each integrator had its own price structure, and how they would pay, what the studios would pay the integrator, and what the integrator would then pay the theater to pay for the equipment. So, but it was kind of a barrier to the independent filmmaker, because the integrator price was the same for Disney and Sony and Paramount and Warner Brothers and Universal as it was for Joe Smith, not Joseph Smith, but Joe Smith, who was trying to make his great film and wanted to play at a theater like this, but couldn't, because the virtual print fees were a barrier. Top end, you're looking $1,200-$1,500 per theater. And when you're spending, $25,000 to make a film, another $1,000 to play in a theater was something that people just thought, yeah, I can't afford that. I'll just go straight to streaming. So it kind of created that pipeline of people in a creative process thinking, well, at least somebody's going to see it. And so the note on the equipment was a 10-year note. And about 11 years ago, the virtual print fees started going away. So that additional cost, in addition to delivering your media to the theater site, went from $1,400 to $75. So it kind of galvanized, and I had talked about this with a lot of exhibitors when I was at Universal about what's going to happen when the virtual print fees are gone, because that was the barrier. I mean, a 35 millimeter print was easily, for 6 reels at 12.5 cents a foot, was easily $1,200. And we were paying those, the studios were, not me personally, but the studios were paying those virtual print fees, because they were ultimately the ones that had the billions of dollars to pay the virtual print fee to help the theater convert. That ultimately, now there's not even a physical drive being sent. So the delivery costs are so much more available to people with modest budgets and grand ideas. So I think it opened the doors, I like to say, democratized filmmaking, and really put into the hands of creatives and storytellers the ability to tell a story and tell it their way and have it experienced in front of 500 people, or our big theater here is 180 seats. And I cannot tell you, in the last couple months, we're working with a number of local nonprofits, and as an independent distributor, I'm always kind of looking at materials and stuff. And when I think about how I can hook an Apple TV up through the HDMI port on this projector, sit in the theater, and then just go looking through the trailers that people are sending me on a 60-foot screen is really a compelling illustration of how much we have evolved on our side of the business to be able to accommodate that kind of vision, that kind of goal. But as I go off the rails, guardrail lady, you just kind of bring me back. Part of the thing is that I think as creatives, it's what is that dichotomy where the creative mind is the left side and the business side is the right side, and the two sides never seem to synapse together. And as much as it would be amazing if it did, it's God's great experiment to figure out, okay, so you have those great creative ideas. Let me introduce you to this guy, Marcus. He's got some business savvy. He's got some ideas. He's got some experience. And the two of you would be a good fit. Just listen. I love listening to filmmakers. I love sitting across the table and hearing the stories and the why. The why is the most important part of any storyteller's, I think, attribute. But rarely
Knowing
does
the
the why.
audience.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, so there's always the what, where, when, why, and who.
Yeah.
And I am, again, I thank God that, so a little bit more personal stuff. In 2020 during COVID, my dad lived in a town that's like 10 minutes drive from where we are sitting right now. And we had been estranged for many, many years, for 38 years. And I said to my partner, I said, look, it's COVID. We're not going to get another chance to do this. Let's just pack everything and get to Florida. So we got here in 2020. I had no idea I would still be here a year later. I thought we'd be here and then COVID would settle down. And ironically and poetically, I got to have the first and the last of every event that my dad and I never got to spend together since 1975 in the time that we still could. And I didn't expect to be here. I was going to school on my birthday 2 years ago. My buddy Joel Davis, who is the COO of the company, says, "Yeah, we're looking for a interim manager in Plant City." I was like, "Plant City? I have no idea where that even is." So it was kind of fortuitous and a lot of fortuosity to be here because I wasn't actually thinking of getting back into operating a movie theater. But the minute, I think it was like the first Friday night, I was standing in the lobby and lines were going this way, lines were going that way. And I just stood there and just watched in amazement as the poetry of people coming together to share something significant. So that to me was one of those kind of things that has given me a different perspective actually sitting here and realizing that. So part of, on the creative side, I think there's an expectation that everybody's going to love what you've created, and that is probably very true. I'm not trying to diminish or marginalize anybody's creative vision, but ultimately, that why has got to include maximizing the investment that I'm going to be asking people to make into my project. And a lot of that begins with the when. When is your film? When are you going to shoot your film? How many weeks are you going to shoot it? What is your post-production schedule? When do you want to release? And I think sometimes, and we talked about this the other day, when you look at the studio release schedule, and I don't mean Box Office Mojo is great, but there's another schedule that shows all the things that all the studios are not putting on Box Office Mojo because they don't want all that intel out there yet. To have a clear path about, all right, we want to release the film on February 12th. Okay. As an independent, there are 2 times of the year where you will not have interference from the studio getting a booking. And that's going to be the month of February, the first couple weeks of March, September, and early October. Though that is your window. Otherwise, the studios are all going to be, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have room for your movie because I've got to play the Sony, Universal, Warner Brothers, Disney kind of stuff. So the first thing that I would suggest to any creative in this process, and it's a process, and it's a very long process, and it has got to include the, my dad said to me one day, well, how are you going to make any money from that? And I was like, oh, good question. I wish he'd asked me that 38 years ago because I had no idea. Because, you know, I'm a studio guy and I'm sending processing payments of millions of dollars for laboratory and film stuff every day. Just boom, rubber stamp, sign, go. God, I hope no one from Fox is listening to realize that's how I process payments. Rubber stamp, sign, go. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. So, I mean, it looked right. Sign on.
Oh.
So in that process, it's lengthy, and it's got to include all of the ego, all of the joy, all of the celebration, but with a clearly defined destination. So pick that date, February 2nd, and then work your way back and say, all right, this is when I can start. Or let me move it to September because I'm going to need more time for location scouting. I'm going to need more time for casting. I gotta have more time to find the cinematographer of my dreams. And that's cool, but just be mindful of that February, March, September, October window as an independent. That is your sweet spot to get the placement in theaters that you're going to want. And number
That
two,
is wisdom.
It's truth. And the other thing is, how do I say this politely? Don't ask.
Say it.
Don't say the following sentence. We just want to work with you guys. Nothing comes across more amateur in the entire world of film distribution to have a filmmaker walk up to a theater owner at a trade show. And one of the biggest trade shows of the year is coming up in Las Vegas. I think it's the 7th through the 11th of April, CinemaCon. I don't know if I'm going yet this year because I have other obligations, but CinemaCon, if you are a filmmaker, you need to be there. You need to pay for registration. Find somebody in the industry that can help you with trade show passes. Maybe you're having your post work done at Deluxe or Technicolor or something like that, where you can call your Deluxe account rep and say, "Hey, I'm thinking of going to CinemaCon next week. Can you help me out with some tickets?" Usually, people on that level, they have the opportunity to say, "I can get you some trade show tickets." Dolby, Cineonic, Barco, Christie, those kinds of places where everyone has some kind of relationship to get out and nurture that relationship by expressing some interest in the exhibition side, because ultimately this is where you want to come. I don't know anything. I'm borrowing from somebody who said this. We don't know anybody who makes a movie for somebody to watch it on their iPhone.
I would say every creative always wants the big screen, the theater experience.
Right.
And thank you for mentioning CinemaCon, because it's back to back in Las Vegas. It's CinemaCon right into NAB, National Association of Broadcasters. So yeah, I'm going, and I hope you get out here so that I can see you in person. One of the favorite things you taught me is the release date is a relationship.
Correct.
The release date is a relationship, and how important it is to set that date and then walk backwards in the calendar for production. I can honestly say on my end, and out of all of the creators that I know, most are so passionate just to get their story made that they haven't thought any further into marketing, distribution, and exhibition.
Correct. And ultimately, on trailering, you want at least 8 weeks. You want to make sure your trailer's on screen 8 weeks before. You've got to make sure you have a commitment from your exhibitors, either as a general kind of AMC cinema. Well, I won't mention any circuits by name, but some are reluctant for very good reasons to not have the bandwidth for independent film. I think it's a mistake. And I think it's a lesson that over time, the more independent filmmakers start to, how do I say this? I don't want to say play by the rules, but understand the challenges and accept them head on and go out and craft their business as a business. Storytelling is a great business, especially when you make money doing it. And I think that there's probably a huge argument that, so you talk about release date. The big mistake that everybody makes is, Well, I picked September 11th, my dad's birthday. I picked September 11th, but I really need to go back and reshoot some stuff, so I got to change the release date. Big mistake, because anybody who changes their release date, you can go back historically and you'll see that the perception is not going to be as respectful as it was when you said your date was September 11th and you had everything ready, that when you had your screening for exhibitors, you had all the little checkboxy things you needed to do, that you were ready on September 11th. We are an industry of reputation and our word. And when you say you're going to do something, just do it. There's no reason that you can't give yourself enough of a buffer. Film will be just as relevant next February as it would have been in September if you just had taken your time. And yeah, there's some things we can't foresee. Hurricanes in Miami or things like that that are going to shut down a production, COVID, these kinds of
Yeah.
things. But I think the relationship with that date is so important because it really kind of solidifies the legitimacy of the relationship.
I love
And
that. I love that. If there was being on the distribution and the exhibition end, if there was going to be an ideal way for that independent production, whether it's the producer or they actually have it in the can and they're ready to go, for your position as the distributor, as the exhibition, what's the ideal way for the independent to come to you and say, hey, I've got this film. Can you show it?
So there are there are some guardrails to this being a very easy process. Naturally, Cinemark, Regal, and AMC are the initial kind of guardrails that, the last film I released, we put together a sensible presentation for Regal. We wound up with like 113 Regal sites across America. And it was because ultimately we had presented our why, because we, for anyone who doesn't know, there is a film gross tracking service called ComScore. You probably see all the time in like the trades. Someone at ComScore said that the opening weekend was fill in the blank. Well, that's because ComScore actually sees all of the POSs. Every theater that has tickets gets uploaded immediately to ComScore. So they can tell you in the blink of an eye that the gross of the William Shatner movie this weekend was $117,000 to date. And I only know that because I was looking at it a few minutes ago. as an example of how things could have been done differently. So and it's always easy to armchair quarterback when you have all the information, as opposed to looking at things and not getting the whole picture. And I think ComScore offers that. So I think ultimately the guardrails are in place to keep the people who need improvement from having access to the sanctuary, the screening room, the theater where people are expecting to walk in and see a studio quality presentation. And it turns out it's Joe Smith's documentary about his trip down the Mississippi River. Not saying that's not a great idea, but the audiences today are expecting something a little more commercial. And I think commerciality is something that can be cultivated over time, especially when that's your intention. If your intention is to make a documentary about your trip down the Mississippi River, it might be disappointing, but if that Mississippi River trip had Brad Pitt with Sigourney Weaver fighting off alien lizards that are played by alligators with freaking laser beams attached to their head, it'd be an entirely different appeal. So I think as independent distributors go, the relationship has got to be at the beginning, not, hey, we're done. Here's my movie. Can you get me 100 theaters? That is, to me, it's what I hear way too often. And to me, it's so, I don't want to say the word disrespectful because it makes me seem like I have some kind of giant ego, because I can't be involved in the beginning of everybody's film all at the same time. But as an independent filmmaker, my prayer for everyone would be to acknowledge that you're in business to make money, because there will be no movie number 2 if movie number 1 doesn't generate an ROI for your shareholders. Your shareholders with that money, unless you're a billionaire and you've got billions of dollars to put into your own project, make whatever you want. But when you have shareholders who are anticipating some kind of a, hey, thank you so much, here's your $100,000 plus another 15% back. And just remember, your P&A Capital is the last money in and the first money out. So that is something to be mindful of, that when you're putting your business plans together, please don't expect that you're going to go to Sundance and Tom Rothman from Sony is going to be coincidentally walking down the hallway at the Metropolitan Theater there in Park City and say, oh my God, what's this movie about? A guy rowing his boat down the Mississippi with Sigourney Weaver and Brad Pitt? Not going to happen. Well, if it does,
you just hit the lottery.
I'm just going to say, if anybody's out there wanting to do that, let me know, because I'll sign on right now. Anyway, but it's got to be at the genesis. And when you're, it starts with every script starts with those two words, fade in. The fade in has got to have a dollar sign connected to it, and what your goals are and what you're thinking, how much it's going to cost. Please don't wait to the end of the project to say, hey, I'm done. What do you think? Let a distributor be a part of that process. Let them be a part of the creative process. Let them help you come up with the right release date. Figure out what comp titles you can use to pull those markets from ComScore, because having access to all of that theater information gives you city information, gives you DMA information, gives you zip code information that you can drill down. I could bring up a report for the William Shatner movie and bring out the top 10 zip codes of where that movie grossed well this weekend in the blink of an eye. And that kind of information is, it's a bit costly, but a good distributor would have access to that and be able to help a filmmaker craft from story to production, to marketing, to distribution sales, because ultimately you're going to have to sell it somewhere. And I think rather than waiting, one of my big frustrations is the numbers of times I get the, hey, we're done with it now, what do you think? Especially from people who I told, don't wait till you're done. So let me get involved now, so you're not having to have this conversation with Sherilyn Baker and I.
Hey, you said something important. For anybody who's listening who doesn't understand what P&A Capital is, could you explain that to them?
Sure. So P&A is what's called prints and advertising. It's the part of the budget that most filmmakers don't include into their budget because they just want to make a movie. And the cost for P&A, I mean, depending upon what your investment looks like and how many theaters and what your digital sales and downrange and international sales are looking like, that P&A can be a modest investment, but it has to include something that's going to get you the prints. And as I think I've just illuminated, you can get your delivery to a cinema site, just like the beautiful one behind me, for upwards to less than $100 per site. But the marketing part, and again, this may surprise you, there are a lot of really smart, wonderful people who are saying, I'm a film marketer, who have never marketed a film before in their lives. And just like there are people who say, I'm a film distributor. Well, what have you released? We've got 4 films out. How big were they? Well, one had 6 theaters and one had 2. What was your per screen average? Oh, another very important number, per screen average. Although some people disagree with me as an independent, that is the one metric that you actually have to be able to say to your exhibition partners, hey, we opened last week in 2 theaters in Tuscaloosa. We had a $10,000 per screen average in both theaters. All of a sudden, you went from being the bothersome independent who won't take no for an answer to somebody who's actually making money at 2 theaters at 20 grand, which is a pretty good per screen average for 2 screens on an independent release. I wish I could see that as an independent. But all of a sudden, you go from being that bothersome, troublesome phone call to, hey, can you give me the grosses on that movie that opened in Tuscaloosa last week? Oh my God, look at that. Yeah, get that guy on the phone now. We want him. So these kinds of things are a part of the relationship that we've got to be mindful of. So, advertising and marketing, I would defer any kind of conversation on that to actual legitimate people with that experience, because it's funny. Everybody seems to have money in the budget for craft services, for coffee for the actors, or transportation for the actors from from whatever. But when it comes down to the actual nuts and bolts of what do you do with the product when you're done, that goes into that mysterious gray level of, well, we don't know, and we're not going to allocate any money. Put $100,000 in your budget. Just put something so that when you go to a distributor, because I'm pretty sure the actors and all the people who are giving you their or selling you their likeness for the 4 weeks you're shooting the movie, and then praying that you're competent enough to get the film across the finish line, so that that time matters, so that their career can go from a star meter of 75,196 to 64,000. I don't know if those are actually legitimate goals, but there's got to be a metrics in this where the honor is 360, where the creative who's got the story, I got this great story, perfect, bazinga. I want so and so to direct it, perfect, great. Let's get them to start the conversation. The relationship with the audience has got to start before you shoot your first frame of film, because ultimately we have this thing now called social media. I know TikTok is something, I don't know, I don't have it, I don't really care. There is all these ways to start to build a relationship. Start with 2 people, start with 20, just so that as you're going through this really intense, passionate, creative process, that you are using that B story as a revenue generator, so that when you're going to your distributor, who you thought to yourself, well, Bobby seems really cool and everything, but he seems really busy, so we don't want to call him right away. I can't tell you how many times I'm happy to talk for free. Don't screw this up, because ultimately, the more independent films who screw it up, the more difficult it becomes for independent films in general. And I only say this because we had a release last year, and one of the big 3 circuits said to me, for the first time in my life, well, if you're listening, you know who I'm talking about. Well, it's our professional experience that independent films just haven't performed well since COVID. So sorry, we have to pass. First time ever in my life. And I know why they passed, because it was a powerful film about a man in recovery who had a dog. It's on YouTube, and it's on probably is on YouTube, but it's called The Year of the Dog. It's a great story of success. And it's set in Montana. It's a beautiful film. Rob Grabo, the filmmaker, became a very dear friend because he was so curious and listened, and we worked so hard. We had a great per screen average. We had a great number of independent theaters, and we delivered the biggest release in this little company's history. So, so ultimately, the thing is to kind of realize that relationship is everything. The who has got to be a part of that relationship. Your relationship with your distributor, with your cast, with your talent, with your craftsmen who are editors, all that stuff, also very important. The when, we talked about that. The why, of course. I think I covered all the bases.
You did. And I think one of my favorite things that is weaving through everything that you shared, I could just listen to you all day. What I heard you say as a golden thread through the entire time is that, hey, filmmaker, you have permission to want your product to make money and be financially viable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
On average, the independents, oh, it's about the story. We're not here for the money. But see, if you're not there for the money, there won't be a number 2. You won't get another chance.
And there's literally nothing wrong. If you are a multimillionaire who wants to go and tell your great story of an ego project, I'm not trying to diminish the value by calling it an ego project. As long as you realize that there will be guardrails that were going to make it difficult for you to be perceived as a business. And I speak of some things that I've looked at where I said to the filmmakers, I said, well, what you need to hear is what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And they were people with money, and it's one of those things that sometimes money and ego, what could possibly go wrong? I'm glad that I work in an industry that I have my entire life that was built on people taking a risk. And unfortunately, 100 years later, people are risk adverse, and they have to see it all spelled out, and they have to see a plan, and they have to see what your goals are, and they have to see all this stuff. And it's cool because that dignifies you as a legitimate player in an enterprise, as opposed to, I made this great movie about these guys rowing down the Mississippi River.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Well, I'm so grateful for your time today. You have dropped gold nuggets like crazy that are going to help the independent, whether they're preparing a film, a television, a series. This side, the distribution tends to be behind Wizard of Oz curtain, and you've just pulled the curtain back to let people learn. Thank you so much. I
my
appreciate
pleasure.
you beyond words, Mark. Um, Before we sign off, would you just pray just a blessing over the person
Oh,
watching who's creative
of
and just
of
needs
course.
joy?
I am blessed because just around the corner that way, every Sunday morning we are blessed. We have a church that holds their church service here in auditorium number 8, and then tonight is their Wednesday night service, and tomorrow is Monday, Thursday, and then we're having a big thing Friday morning at 5:30 for a sunrise Good Friday. Come and be reflectful and prayerful. And dear Lord, I cannot thank you enough for Sherilyn and today, and to be able to let my voice and my passion and my legacy and all that you have laid at my feet over these many years in this incredible industry of your light and your sound, to illuminate pathways that perhaps people had only heard of or weren't clear about and weren't comfortable asking what or how, or finding someone that sees the magic in this business. I pray, Lord, that there's a solution and a cathartic moment where creatives find that spark and let that those natural lumens that come from you help power and fuel their greatest storytelling entrepreneurship ever. In your name I pray, amen.
Amen. Yay! Thank you so much. You're just so generous. I just so appreciate you.
My pleasure.
All
And you know
right,
how to get me,
friends.
right? Just markbovey@mac.com. Anybody just happy to help.
Will do. All right,
All
friends.
right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.